Hey, Julie, it is so awesome to have you on the podcast. I know that we're just getting to know each other, but I'm really excited for this conversation.
I am. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. A lot of the people that I speak to on my podcast and on others tend to be from the UK. So I think it's always interesting to have these kind of global conversations to find common ground and to find those gaps that we have different views on or different lived experiences, maybe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and sort of what, when I saw your post and I started to get into the work that you do around money, around wealth, I stumbled upon this podcast episode that you've done around the myth of social mobility. And I was like, oh,
Mm.
I've never talked about that. I like, let's get into that. So I would love for you to share like your experience around the myth of it, and particularly for entrepreneurs, which are like my primary audience. Like, what are your thoughts, feelings, values, viewpoints on that?
Sure. I think it goes back to when I was a kid. So when I was at school growing up, the message that I got from parents, from teachers, from all the adults was pretty much work hard, be kind to other people. And the other thing was don't get pregnant. That was like literally the three things, right? Work hard, be nice to everyone and don't get pregnant. And if you did those things, you'd be okay as a woman, right? And there was definitely an undertone. I went to a Catholic school. There was definitely an undertone of, you've got to be smart, but only smart enough to find a husband, really, and then he'll look
Right,
after you,
right. That's the
right?
perfect good girl code.
Yes, totally. And in my lived experience, I couldn't see that for myself because my mum had six children with the same man. She got cancer and he took off, right? So my mum was left with six kids. She was in her 30s, so six kids under the age of 10. So in my mind, I was like, well, she worked hard. She was kind. She got married. She had all these children with the same man. This is not working out very well for her. So why should I follow all these rules? And so the careers advice, which was very much about get a stable career, a profession that people understand, doesn't matter what you're interested in, but go for security. I was like, I don't know that I buy into that. And I think at school, I was labeled, a bit of a problem child, a rebel, too opinionated, didn't know my place. And I think I had this knowing really early on that I was, even saying this sounds weird, that I was meant to do something. I was meant to be someone. And I couldn't believe that the adults in my life treated me the way they did. I was like, do you not know who I am? And so I had this. I was a little shit. I was, a difficult child to be around because I knew everything. I was so smart and switched on, and I could see what was happening emotionally and socially. And I challenged things. I challenged the teachers. I challenged the nuns at my school, and that didn't go down very well. So, I got this big old label that said, you are too much. And, academically, I was told that I wasn't that smart. And I ended up going on to get a first class degree of honours and a master's degree and all of those things. But I was written off. And I think the reason I was written off is because the teachers knew my story. They knew I came from a single parent family and they had already put me in a box. And so when I had careers advice, it was always, oh, why don't you be a nursery nurse? Because, you've got so much experience of your younger siblings. And, yeah, put me in a box. Didn't matter what I was interested in. And, I didn't know what career I wanted. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have adventures. I wanted people to listen to me. I had stuff I wanted to say. I
Mm,
didn't know it was possible to be a writer or to be a filmmaker or to be an artist. I didn't know what those things were,
yeah.
but I wanted to be heard. I had stuff I wanted to share. And so the only route I could see was drama. I had a bond with my drama teacher, and she saw something in me. And so I just followed that as a pursuit. That's what got me to uni. I was very much involved in a street dance crew when I was a kid. And so, the arts and culture and expression, that was my stuff. And so when I went to uni, I looked at how you could use the arts to explore where you came from. And that had a really profound experience on me. I went to uni in a place called Winchester, which is very posh, very well spoken, very white England, whereas I grew up in a very multicultural, rough around the edges. And so it felt like polar opposites. I didn't know there were places in the UK where there were no Black people. I was like, where are all the Black people? And so that was a real call for me to come back to East London, to come back and do work with other people that felt trapped by their circumstances, that felt trapped by the labels that other people gave to them. And so, early part of my career, I did lots of work as an artist, a filmmaker, choreographer, all sorts of kind of community engagement stuff. And then the Olympics came to town. The Olympics happened in my hometown, and it changed the physical landscape of where we lived. We had our first shopping mall. We had really crappy markets and terrible high streets, and then all of a sudden we had a big Westfield with like places to eat and a casino. No one even knew what a casino was. So all of this regeneration happened, and it was an exciting place to be, but it also become like this place of polarization, the haves and the have-nots. And I didn't know where I fit into all of that, because I was university qualified, but I still speak like everybody else, and I still enjoy going out and getting drunk at the weekends, and I still have similar circle of friends, and all of these cultural, socioeconomic labels, and I wasn't sure where I fit into all of that, and so I didn't have a career plan, I didn't have a life plan, and I've had adversity over adversity over adversity, 5 redundancies. I was made redundant when I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter Rose, the day after the opening ceremony of the Olympics, after having worked for 8 years on the games. My relationship broke down. I made bad investment decisions around where I bought my property, all of these things, one after the other. And I didn't have the network that a lot of my friends have in terms of parents that can bail them out, or I didn't have a lot of financial knowledge. I wasn't very literate around how to access money, what to do with the money that I made. And so I've just been just grafting my way through life. And then the last time I was made redundant, which was just 6 months ago, I realized I'm angry. I'm actually quite angry that it's taken me until I'm 45 to understand that these inequalities can't just be worked through. You can't just say, I'll work hard and I'll be okay in the end. There are systematic things that hold, I was going to say people like me, it's not just people like me, that hold some people back. Right. Yeah. And there are these complexities, right? And we all have our own levels of complexity. So, it's funny, growing up, it was like, there's always someone worse off than you. And that was almost like a way of saying, you should never moan, you should never complain, because there's always someone worse. And that is true, but it also doesn't take away from the fact that your life is really hard. Yeah. It's not a competition. It's not the Olympics of trauma or the Olympics of difficulty, And so I had this moment 6 months ago where I was like, here was I thinking I could step my way out, work my way out of poverty and change things for my daughter, when actually I'm very much in the same situation that all of my ancestors have been as well, which is work really, really hard. Then life wears you down, you have some kind of trauma, some kind of relationship breakdown, and you realize you're not safe and you're not secure anymore. And I was shocked at that revelation, because I thought I'd be okay. I thought I'd be able to work hard and my business would grow and all of these things. And I've realized, particularly for solopreneurs, particularly since the pandemic, we have no support. We pay into a tax system in the UK. I don't know how it works in America, but we pay heavily. Every penny we make is not ours. And then at the end of it, what are we left with? Everything that we seem to invest in, property, when we die, the government take most of it away from us anyway. So how do we really create change?
Yeah.
And so that's where the book came out. I'm not an expert on money. If I was, I wouldn't be in the situation I am. But I'm really good at making money. I'm really good at selling and creating ideas and creating movements. You know, for 10 years, I run a company called Too Fat to Run. It was all about plus size fitness and fear of judgment. And that was just the seed of an idea. And that was after I got made redundant and I needed to do something to keep myself sane. That came out of nowhere. We didn't have plus size athletes in the UK. We're, you know, too prim and proper for that. So I was like first to market. So I know how to create business. I have genius ideas. But there's still something missing. There is this gap and I can't figure out what it is. And I'm smart. I'm really smart. And I can't figure out why I still feel broke a lot of the time. Right. And so it's not about like, poor me, because, you know, one of the chapters in the book is about taking radical responsibility. Yes, the world is shit. Yes, there are structural things that make it difficult for some people, but I still have choice. I still have autonomy. I can still make some changes for my own life. If I sit in a cave crying and weeping about how unfair the world is, that just doesn't help anybody. But I'm curious. And that's how I started my career, you know, and my learning was about curiosity. How can I do things different? How can I find out? How can I learn? You know, and I'm determined to be in rooms where everyone's smarter than me, where I can ask questions. And I think I can get away with, because of my working class roots and the way I speak, people underestimate me a lot. And so I can ask silly questions because they go, oh God, she's a bit thick, isn't she? You know, but a lot of really smart people are too afraid to ask those questions. And so, you know, the start of my book is a glossary asking, you know, what is an asset and what is a dividend and what is this and what is it? And there's a little bit of a humorous take. I couldn't think of anything for X because I was like, what is there that's a financial term for X? So I used X as in ex-partner, ex-work colleague, ex-boyfriend. You know, they are a sunk cost and you're never going to get that back. You know, so I think, you know, on the one hand, I'm really angry and in my like kind of crusader mode. And then in the other side of things, I'm like, oh no, I still want to find the joy in life. I still want to enjoy money. I still want to have nice things. I still want to teach my daughter that she can have and be anything she wants. So it's complex. It's not, you know, it is absolutely on a spectrum, just like wealth is. And I think when I got made redundant the last time, and I was so broken, like so broken, really questioning if I even wanted to be on this planet anymore. And I thought, that's just because of money. That's just because of money. How can I feel so worthless because of my current financial situation? That's not right. Wealth isn't just about the money you've got in your bank account.
Right.
And so I'm determined to not let whatever happens financially be the reason that I feel broke, because we have so many other resources and currencies that we can use if we stay out of that really dark place of feeling defined by the money we have.
Right. Coupling worth with how much or how little you have in your bank account. Yes. Yeah. And one thing that you said that impacted me was, you know, how we often, you know, when it comes to like making money and being sort of radically responsible, sometimes we can sort of lean into a place where, you know, where we don't really look at the systemic picture. We're like, yeah, you can do it. You can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can like make a lot of money, especially in the entrepreneur world where we can be like constantly selling the dream. But there are realities that we don't really want to look at, and that maybe as women of color, we don't want to look at, that do impact how much money we are able to make in the online space, for example. You know, whether it's how we look or how we speak, you know, because sometimes it feels a little bit like a popularity contest, you know.
Totally.
In the online
and I also think there's something literally in our DNA, right? And I had this thought last week on Thursday. I was going into London, and I was sitting on the train, and I had a list of people that I was going to reach out to either go on their podcast or ask to help promote the book and all of this kind of stuff. And I felt physically blocked. I felt like I could throw up because it was asking for help. And I was like, these are people that I know, that love me, that would want to help me. Why can't I just simply ask them for help? And so I asked myself that question: why do I find it so hard to ask for help? And the answer that came out, and I know that this is so loaded, the answer that came out was because you were the help. Right. So my great grandma, she worked in service. My nan was a cleaner. My mum, because of education, she became a typist, which is a step up from being a cleaner. But, historically, my working class family were the help. And I know the help means something very, very different in the US. I know that. And because of that, it feels so, I want to cry every time I think about that, because there's something in my body that feels like that needs to let go. I can't create wealth while I still hold on to all of those emotions that my family have experienced,
Yes. Yeah. And this is why, I, as a provider of somatic work, like these are precisely the pieces that we don't recognize, like this. It's like identity work through the body, right? Really releasing some of the ancestral stories, or even the shame, right? Like that feeling of ick that comes up. Oh, I'm asking for help, and we were the help, and this is like where I find myself now. And this is like, it feels so tough to open into that next level, right? And then like the other piece here is like, thinking about, there are, you said there are inequalities that can't be worked through, right? Thinking about like in the online space, there is still like, your age, your appearance, your, we are like, all of those things factor in, like your popularity, how well known you are already in the online space, like can feel like enormous barriers to, right,
but
that
also
are external versus the internal ones.
But also the technology, right? And the way that technology works, the way that social media works. So we used to feel like if I do 10 years in the game, I've earned my stripes. I've got a track record. I'm higher than somebody that's just coming into my world. That's not true anymore. That's not true. Someone can come straight out of, say, a coaching qualification or whatever. They can put £20,000 into Facebook ads or whatever they want. They can brand themselves as an expert. They can tell a wonderful story. And before you know it, they're more successful in business than you are.
Right. That having money at the outset, right, can get you ahead already. So that's a piece of the privilege right there. Yes.
Total. And not only the access to the money, but the expectation. Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they jump in and be successful straight away?
Yeah.
They shouldn't have to graft. Like we have that kind of that story of, to get somewhere you have to work hard. I think a lot of youngsters don't have that so much because technology is there.
And there's a generational gap. Like even just, I see a lot of stuff like Gen X versus Gen Z and Gen Y. And like Gen Y don't have that work hard ethic. They're just more like, and I think in a healthy way, it can sort of lead to unhealth, but in a healthy way, feeling more entitled, like, I don't have, this doesn't need to be so freaking hard. Like, I can like allow this to come to me, and right, which I think is like, okay, like nice that we're sort of breaking down that myth of needing to work hard and having it be hard and and like I feel like, in a lot of ways there are culture clashes, because I see a lot of young people who are worse off than their parents were. Right? Who are not doing as well as their parents were, because there have been changes in our economy. I don't know how you feel about it in England, but here in the US, like I see a lot of people who are just living at the margins, who are just one leg break away from bankruptcy or right?
Like and how I think it's different now to what it would have been before. If you were destitute before, the people in your street might know about it. They might see that you've had to go and ask for help. Now, when you're destitute, the whole world knows about it because of the number of connections we have online and the way everything's played out publicly. So that, we drive cars that we can't afford. We wear clothes that we can't, there's this, and we see it with the kids. Like one of the reasons that I moved out of London, where I've lived for 40 odd years, is I couldn't deal with the gang stuff. Right. So I started my career working with young people, many of whom were in gangs. and I felt like I could make a difference. What I realized as a 40-odd-year-old white woman is I can't make no bloody difference. And actually I was seeing it affect my own family members. And I thought, I don't want my daughter dating a gang member. I mean, it was literally like that. And I was like, I've got to pull her away from the environment because I can't, I just can't see a way through. And part of the issue is, how can you, particularly as a single mum, there's a lot of conditioning that happens with boys of single mums. How can you say to your single parent mum, I want a pair of Nikes that are £100, when £100 is all the mum has got to spend on shopping for the month, right? And so those boys, in an entrepreneurial way, go and use the only currency they have, which is their street cred and their ability to sell drugs and make music and all that kind of stuff that comes with it. And they get trapped in the system. And so this it's a really difficult thing around kind of commerce and commercialism and image. And, me and my sister have this joke because like she earns less than me, but likes designer items. And I earn more than her and don't care about designer items. So I call her a poor tramp, and she calls me a rich tramp or something like that. It's like this joke we have between us because our values are so different. I don't care if what car I'm driving, like it's not a label of success for me, whereas she very, very much does. And so, it's really difficult when you then start to try and share your values with your children when their experience, even at 5, 6, 7, everything's played out on the TV, on social media. And, I want my daughter to believe that anything is possible. And we play games around like, asking for what you want, being very specific about what you want. And, who knows, it might happen. And we do dream boards and stuff like that. But there are also moments where I have to pull her up on her language because her expectation that mum's going to buy her everything that she ever wants forevermore. She jokes, she says, Mum, you're with me for life. And I'm like, well, that's not strictly true, Rose. You are going to have to get a job and I'm not going to be here forever. And so it's really difficult when we know that historically we are where we are because of our parents and because of the socioeconomic circumstances that they were raised in. And we know at some point that's going to be our legacy for our kids. Right. And so one of the things I was really interested in, and I did a little bit of kind of reading around this, was after the Second World War, what happened in the UK is there was, the birth of the NHS, the birth of like social work, social housing, all of these industries happened that required a workforce. And so what happened was a lot of the smart working class people were able to jump up the ladder because if you were smart, you got access to free education. All of a sudden, you're a professional. But those new industries are not coming.
Right.
And so that requirement for the workforce isn't there. So we have a smarter population, fewer jobs, so it's really difficult to set one generation against another when the circumstances were completely different.
Exactly. Historical circumstances completely different. Like a lot of boomers, for example, like didn't need to go to college, right? Or college was for them like 2 years and they were able to advance through promotions and things like that versus us being overeducated and, like underemployed, under earning. Exactly. Yes. So true. So true. Yeah. And I think another piece that we often miss is that, you talked about, there were moments in the podcast you talked about like your own experience with being impacted by, burnout, for example. Or, when I think about my own process of like becoming chronically ill or having my chronic illness sort of like be on display and sort of take over more of my life. And even like during COVID, feeling like low-key burnt out. Like I could have continued making 6 figures being a therapist, but I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like I'm just feeling like feels awful to work so much. And so shifting into coaching and then making less money, but feeling better physically, and having to go through all of those changes too. And then like going through a divorce and having like the money that I made on selling my house go directly to lawyers' fees. Like just a month after I sold my home, those, whatever, the $12,000 ended up going to my lawyer,
Yeah.
and just like, yeah, different circumstances like that, like also impact our
Yeah.
ability to just get ahead, right? For
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
Yeah. And it's difficult to look at those sums of money, right? So thinking about like owning your own home and being able to leave money to your kids, that was the message when we were growing up, is that the way that you got your kids to do better is to leave them something in your will and all of that kind of stuff. And, my parents bought their first house for £11,000. You can't buy a car for £11,000.
Right, right.
So, and I remember saving money for a deposit, and I was saving £150 a month in my 20s, and I got to £15,000, which was enough for a deposit for the house. And it was painstaking work to raise that money, right?
Yeah.
And then, as you say, you get a tax bill, and I'm like, oh my god, that tax bill is more than what I paid for that house. Or it's just these, and then you realize it's nothing. You never see this money. It's just this thing, and sometimes, like in business, sometimes it feels harder to sell a product that's 50 quid than what it did to sell a £12,000 consultancy gig. That, like, the selling process is similar, like,
Yeah.
sometimes the energy that it requires is the same,
Yes,
and so
exactly.
sometimes I say to my clients, like, just for fun, go into your website and add zeros on everything, just for fun. Like, leave it there for 24 hours, see if anyone notices, like, see how it makes you feel, like, because it's just meaningless, and my clients always know that I'm going to get them to put a zero on the end just for fun, right? And I say, what does it mean? So when they say, oh, I want to make £5,000 a month, and I go, what if it was 50? And one of my clients, oh my God, it's so funny. She said, if it's 50, I have to wear white linen trousers. And I said, what? She said, because rich women always wear white linen trousers. And she said, like, I don't really want to wear white linen trousers. And so I'm like, that's the reason you don't want to make £50,000 a month, right? Just so we're clear, And so we have all of these silly things, and it's catching yourself around, it's part money mindset for sure, but it's also the logistics of, okay, so I make £50,000 this month, but how much of that do I keep? What's the cost?
Exactly.
So there's practical, tangible things, and then there's energetic things. Like, I remember sharing with my brother, who's a plumber, that I'd made £30,000 in a month, and I was so worried about what he might think. I was so worried that he would judge me. And all he did was say, brilliant, it's your round at the bar, like, go and buy us a drink. Like, that's pretty much all it meant, but I built it up into this big thing. I didn't want to make him, as my older brother, feel bad about what he earned. And so it's complex. Money is complex, and it feels so freeing to have these conversations, because for many, many years I had nobody to talk to about money, like literally nobody.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with social mobility. You become othered. The more successful you become, the more detached you feel from the people that are your people.
Yeah.
There are certain conversations I can't have with my best friends, not because I don't love them, not because they don't love me, not because they wouldn't want me to have the conversations, but it's we're polar worlds apart, and they haven't had the experiences that I have had in the online world, or in making shit tons of money and losing it. And so it's pointless having those conversations, because
right. And even on the education level, right? Like, when you get an education level that is social mobility, you have more flexibility, you have more options around like where you work and how much time flexibility or control over your time you have, right? When I started my private practice, like, I could make my own hours, I could do this, I could do that. And I realized, like, as I was making my money, like, I was making more than, my mother and my father. And that felt good in a way, like, oh yes, like, I am sort of like, I felt like I was stepping into sort of a higher level. And then at the same time, I also felt the loss. I also felt the separation of, like, they don't know my experience. Or even as I was getting educated, my father had finished 1 year of college. That's it, right? Before I came along and basically, like, cut those plans. But yeah, like, I couldn't talk to them about getting my doctoral degree or getting a certification in somatics, because they didn't know what that was like.
Yeah.
So I had
Yeah.
to really find other people who got it,
Yeah.
and I think in entrepreneurship, I think it's also so important to have a community of people who get it, who are not going to be like, you do what?
Yeah.
And like, why are you doing this and doing that? So I think it's super duper important to have that support to, right? You said to be like to have the people in the room be smarter than you so that you can sort of like upgrade
Yeah.
to where they're at, or ask
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. And it's brought a lot of things up. So my daughter's about to go to secondary school, and where we've moved to. So where I used to live had terrible schools, like for lots of reasons. So you had to send your child to like a religious school to get a decent education. And then that come with loads of stuff. But where I live now, every school is great, like literally every school. And so we're doing the rounds of all the schools. And we went to a private school the other day. And the reason that I went, my daughter is dead against it. It's a boarding school. She's dead against it. But I was just curious. I was like, I never got the chance as a child. I want to go and see what it's like. And
Yeah.
actually, once we got there, it was so different to how we both thought it would be. And now she's actually quite open to us exploring that as an option. And it makes me think, like, the first time I ever thought about my position in the world was when I went to uni. It was the
Yeah.
first time I was around wealthy people. I'd
Yeah.
never been around anybody that had money before. And
Yeah.
that's at like 18, 19. I don't want my daughter to get to that age and realize that there are opportunities and different types of people. And so,
Yeah.
you then get on that thing of, God, do I manipulate that for her, or do I let her find her own way? Because,
Mhm.
I very much had to find my own way, but it was hard.
Right,
So
right.
I'm pulled all the time about how much do I provide for her and how much do I let her figure it out. And
Julie, I'm having like a flashback to two memories that I want to share that I feel like are very important to what you are sharing right now. One of them is like the first time I used to work as a temp when I lived in San Francisco before studying, psychology. I worked as a temp, and I worked as a temp in, like, I even forget what industry it was, but I think it might have been like a financial services industry. And I was in charge of organizing the resumes of, interns coming in. And I think this is one of the first times that I felt cultural shame
mm,
was reading those resumes. And like, basically it was like pedigree dogs, like
mm,
just the highest level, Yale, Princeton, Harvard, which are like our Ivy League schools in the United States, the best institutions, and all of the opportunities that had afforded them, and
yeah,
like through their parents, even connections, right? Relationships. It's all about
yeah,
relationships,
yeah,
and feeling like, whoa, I am nobody. Like
yeah,
just looking at these resumes and being like, I have none of this, none
yeah,
of this,
yeah,
and that was one memory. And it was just so shocking. And then I have my other memory that came up was of, I did go, like, this is afterwards. I did go did a second undergraduate degree in psychology because I did want to study at the graduate level. And one of my professors was like, where are you applying to? I'll put in a good word for you. And I was like, like, I was insulted that he wanted to help me. I was like, I don't need your help. Like, I can get in there on my own. Like, I didn't understand this is how the world worked and that people like helped other people. I was like, no.
yeah,
But this is like from coming from the background that I came from. I
yeah,
didn't understand, like, people help each other. People like get people in the door, like foot in the door,
yeah,
opportunities, like and that is sort of what privilege affords you. And that's why, like, when we struggle with this idea of like, I can't get ahead, it's because of these little pieces that
yeah,
maybe we're missing, or we're not as connected because the whole where our family comes from, like, there
mm,
is a lineage of privilege as well,
yeah.
right?
And I think it's like, the answer is always, or not the answer is, but the question then is, what do we do? What do we do
Right.
with all of that? Because it's
Exactly.
challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's one solution, but I think it lies in curiosity and safety. How
Yeah.
far can I push the boundary and still feel safe, right? And so I think as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of thing about success. Success is the metric, right? How do we become successful? And I'm trying to flip that for myself, because success is always defined by other people anyway. I want security, which sounds so boring, but actually that's what I want. I don't want the highs and the lows, the dips, the bouncing back, the yo-yoing, because what that comes with is all the emotional turmoil. And, I'm sick of being strong. I'm sick of being inspiring. Inspiring doesn't pay the bills, like, go away. I want stability. I want foundations that I can build upon. And so it's that thing of, how can I push the boundaries without taking too much personal risk?
Right.
How can I stretch myself, but without leaving nothing of myself for that place of safety and security?
Yeah. Go ahead. You were gonna
the cost is too high. The cost is too high. The risk, in entrepreneurship, is always about the risk. Oh, if you want it enough, you'll take the risk. It's only the people that take the risk. People, so many people are already living on the edge. Our lives are risky as hell. And then you want me to take another leap? Go away. Like,
Yeah. And the other piece is like, I'm not someone who is, sometimes I'll get into the space where I feel very bogged down by systems and by inequalities, but that's not somewhere I want to live. I don't want to live in that space where I'm just like blaming circumstances. I want to take them into account. I want to acknowledge them, and I want to give myself so much grace around them, but I don't want it to be my story.
Yeah. I think there's also, somebody once said something to me, because I've always been like, since I was a young child, I used to cry with rage. I remember in drama we did there was a book, I remember, I've still got a copy of it. I think I stole the copy of it, but it was a book called Motherland, and it was the story of the Windrush, the first time Caribbean people en masse came to the UK, and there was pictures. I remember the pictures of slavery and all of that. And I just couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep. And, my parents would never have taught me about that. And so, I went to a very mixed school, and I remember just like being so angry and wanting to change things. Like, that's so not fair. And that sense of rage has stayed with me my whole life. But somebody once said to me, Julie, don't crusade for too long, because what happened to all the crusaders? They all died. Right. And so sometimes I get into that crusader energy at the expense of my own safety and security. Like, there's only so much fight you can have. Right. And it's not to mean that you don't ever like fight for anything, but you have to pick your battles. Right. And sometimes you've got to fight for yourself, and keep that fight a little bit more internalized, rather than going out there. And, I used to cause so much drama and aggro online when I run my fitness business. I got cancelled by ASICS, the brand, because they'd showed this photo that was not diverse, in all sorts of things. And then there was this big backlash, and I just, the toll on my body, they were like, we're going to send our lawyers on you. And, and I was like, it's only me in the corner of my front room. Like, I have an opinion, and I'm not going to shut up because you tell me to. So, there comes a point where the cost of the fight becomes too much.
Right. It has to be sustainable. It has
to be sustainable.
Right.
And collective.
Yes.
Like, and then we all just do our little bit. And that collective voice could be really powerful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you. Yes. What a great conversation, Julie. So
juicy.
Yeah. So tell us, please, about How Not to Be Broke, your new book.
Yeah. So How Not to Be Broke is due out imminently in the next few days. I know the ebook is coming out on the 28th, but the paperback will be out anytime soon. And it's 12 principles for how not to be broke. It's all about radical responsibility. It's my story. It's definitely autobiographical, but it's also real hard tactical business advice as well. It's a wake up call if you are sitting there happy, not making money in your business. So it helps you to identify what kind of business you're currently running, whether it's a loss leading business or a legacy business, and who you need to be, rather than being a chief grafting officer, which most of us are. How can we step into that CEO role and take more responsibility for our wealth beyond the life of our business?
Yeah.
I'm so proud of it. And I'm just glad it's out. I'm glad it's out of my head and my heart, and that other people can enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where can people get access to it?
Yeah, so it's going to be available on Amazon.
Okay.
And if you go to my website, juliecreffield.com/broke,
Yes.
there's lots of free resources and ways to kind of get involved in the movement. I've got a Facebook group and a podcast and all of
Awesome.
that stuff.
Okay. All right. And I'll include all of those links in the show notes so that people
Yeah.
can get a hold of you and get curious about about the creative process and this tactical business advice, these principles. Yeah. So excited. I'm excited to get into it as well myself.
Yeah, it's been amazing. This has been great.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And yeah, I hope that our paths cross again.
Yeah. Thank you so much.